Hi folks, Loma02 here. Going to be doing some Pennylander deck tech and then some gameplay with the deck that you have in front of you, which is a Penny Highlander, or it's basically a 100 card singleton with eternal legality, excepting each card is 1 penny or less at the time of the Penny Dreadful rotation rulings, which happened recently with cycle rotation. So standard cycle rotation. So what you have here is a meta deck that I've kind of been working on, developing, and found to actually be pretty decent. Most of the games I've played with it at least has decent game against most things. And like you might say, like blue white's pretty decent in most formats, or at least some meta deck in most formats, or some variety of it is. But it's really like trying to find the right way to do it in this format. So one of the things I found in season 16, the season 16 cycle, is that a more mid-range variety of this deck that was more neutral bias between blue, black, and white was probably the more reasonable deck, as opposed to the control style build, or like big control style builds that like you historically kind of associate with Azorious control. And a lot of that had to do with the legality of cards like Gideon Jura, Dovin Bond, and Jace Beleren. You had a lot more low end, and I think it behooved you to play more creatures like Shadow Mage Infiltrator. Even did Rovo style cards like the Lockmare Serpent. Those style cards, so you're a little more mid-range. You kind of had more of a median game plan. But I think overall it was a better deck. It was a better deck for having played it that way. One of the issues that I run into in this format is that you don't have the walkers. All three of those walkers were banned. They went over Ascent. So you lost all of them, which kind of took away those as like incremental grinding tools, just like advantage tools like life gain. Basically, Gideon can be the moat, can be a win con as well. So the flexibility they ultimately offered, I think, was too big a blow to stay in a mid-range shell. I have built an Esper mid-range shell, but one of the issues you run into in Pennylander is that your mana fixing when you're not in a green deck is going to fall apart pretty fast. So I tended to find that it was best to like bias very heavily into one color, in this case blue, and have a secondary strong color that's like maybe like to the 40th or 30th percentile of the mana requirements of your primary color, in this case blue, and then white. And I am touching black as well for a couple key capabilities. One, interim to mid-game removal, Vindicate, Mortified, Spark. Other end. And then I also wanted to play Merciless Eviction. Genesis is a card in this format. Graveyards kind of matter. Being able to nip a bunch of creatures in the bud is pretty good. Merciless Eviction is also just a very powerful card because it can deal with any variety, for the most part, any variety of permanent types, excepting lands. It's quite good. And then the big one is Cling to Dust. I just really wanted to run Cling to Dust because I think graveyards are very important. And when I initially built this deck, I was running cards like Scrabbling Claws to deal with bins, and they're just infinitely less powerful than Cling to Dust. So I thought it was kind of worth the splash to have like a long game engine in the form of Cling to Dust. Cling to Dust also can just help stabilize you against very aggressive decks because the life gain options. It's just ultimately, in my opinion, a more versatile card. So I was willing to go into the third color into black to have access to that. So this is basically Azorious Splash Black approach. The deck is very WinCon light, and I'll kind of go through how I have the deck piled up. But the primary way that you win the game is via Approach of the Second Sun, which is a 7 mana sorcery, kind of do nothing card that you gain 7 life when you cast it, and it gets put 7th from the top of your deck. And then basically once you cast it again, you win the game. So it's kind of like basically an alt-win style card that eventually just became a primary win con for decks when it was in its standard rotation. It was kind of popular. And I think it's pretty good. Like, I've tended to find that it's really good. I found it was one of my favorite win cons for this style of deck just because of the simplicity of it. And also the way you can build this deck to essentially stabilize on board. You can basically get rid of a lot of permanent-based threats that your opponent might have, and then via gaining 7 life, you reduce a lot of options through red-based burn, like removal/burn, to do damage to your face. Effectively, I mean, they can still do it, but it's not going to kill you after you've cast an approach generally, unless they have an awful lot of it. So that's kind of the name of the game for this deck. This deck is very heavily into Wrath effects. We're running Time Wipe, End Hostilities, and Merciless Eviction. You could go even heavier in them. I believe there are numerous wraths you can play. I mean, you can play Black Zenith if you want to go heavier in black. You can play the Awaken Wrath of God. You could play Consume the Meek. Infest type cards are available in the format. You have your Henny's Expertise. I didn't want to go that heavily into black, but there are quite a few options. I've been very happy with 3. I could see going up to 4 if you were in a very, very... Like, the thing is, like, Wrath of Gods in general, you don't want too many of them because this deck is already pretty good against the decks that Wrath of God is good against, generally speaking. Like your mid-range style decks. Where you do want to increase the density of them is against, like, White Weenie, because, like, they're basically, like, their actual, like, literal non-land card pool is, like, 90% creatures. So you're going to tend to get a lot of miles out of Wrath of Gods. You can just Wrath of God, like, you could probably do it, like, turn 5 and then turn 6 Wrath of Gods. Are generally pretty good against that style of deck because they can sandbag a lot of creatures in deck due to the high density they run, and each of them are independently of pretty high quality, or at least they're threatening cards. They're like 2 mana, 3 power attackers, or 2 mana, 2 power attackers, which with 2 of them on board or 3 of them on board, they'll kill you quickly. Sometimes like that's a pattern of play you may want to have. So if that was like a heavy component of your metagame, I think you'd want to go up. Maybe shocking to no one, like these style of cards, however, like when they get in too high of a density, they're very mana inefficient. And against decks like Red Deck Wins, like you tend to want to resolve 1 or 2, and then just not see them anymore and just counter their spells from there on out, or gain enough life and just independently kill like the single creatures they draw off the top of their deck to kind of stay out of burn range. So I've been very happy with 3. But the general philosophy of this deck, like most blue-white control decks, is to basically ensure that your opponent is unable to do anything that's effective in trying to implement their game plan, and then eventually get to yours. There's a couple ways the deck does win. Like I said, I already covered Approach. Decree is another common way the deck can win. Sometimes you'll cycle this EOT and make 7/1/1s and just beat them down with 7/1/1s. That tends to be effective enough. The most common way is generally not tilt, but I mean like, your opponent realizes like there's no way I can win this, so I'm just going to concede it. That generally tends to be the primary way, but that generally means you're just working towards this. You also have Eternal Dragon, which is a reasonable way to win the game. It's in the deck because it is multimodal, right? Like this card basically has 2 modes on it. It's either find a plains, and it's an engine card, so you can keep on returning it during your upkeep and finding more and more plains, or put a 5/5 flyer into the board. A 7 mana 5/5 flyer is a thing to write home about, but it's still a fine threat. I mean, it trades off pretty well with most things in the format. It blocks pretty well. It attacks pretty well. And when it's not relevant, you tend to be cycling it. One of the issues you run into with cards like Eternal Dragon, and maybe even to some extent Decree of Justice, because it's such a creature-light deck, a lot of removal will tend to rot and languish inside an OP's hand. So if you try to go for an Eternal Dragon win, like turn 20 of the game or whatever, they're going to kill it like 3 turns in a row when you bring it back, which isn't per se a bad thing. I mean, you're still drawing cards. So are they, I suppose. But, I mean, you're still drawing cards, and it's pretty much a free card because you're using, 5 mana to return it when you have a vast surplus of mana. That said, it's not the most reliable win con, in my experience. It just tends to be like an incidental one where you just have it and you can grind cards with it, and you tend to do... It does very well at grinding cards. It's a card engine in the deck. A couple other important ones. Dovin's Acuity is very important in this deck. This is one of the cards that... So one of the trouble matchups that I've kind of hinted at is like Red Deck Wins style decks. The big reason I built this deck is because like Red Deck Wins tends to be a place that a lot of players will go initially when they jump into a format because it's familiar. It's not the most challenging to build, and it's a very effective strategy, right? Like, just burning someone out, putting the best burn spells and the best cheap creatures with the highest power in your deck is not a bad strategy. It generally tends to win games of Magic. And that's not untrue of Pennylander either. Like, Red Deck Wins is very good. In my opinion, though, like, the decks that I have kind of just seen and built with and played with in the card pool that tend to be the most matchup neutral, kind of like the best decks if you just want to play your way out of anything, are the green-based mid-range to control decks. Because they tend to have very good equity and value against like the Red Deck Win style decks. They have life gain, they have incremental creatures that find lands and act as 2-for-1s, and or trade off with creatures if they're in the rock coloration. BG tends to be my favorite, like base set of colors. Like going into Gender, going into Abson's fine as well, or even like 4 or 5 color Blink. But basically being base green, in my opinion, tends to be like the most matchup neutral style of deck. That said, I kind of wanted to build this deck, that goes over the top of that style of deck. in hopes that that style of deck would tend to eliminate red deck wins from being the most viable option. And this could, get over the top of those green-based mid-range decks. That said, I mean, if you meet up with red deck wins, you can win the matchup. In this format, there are a lot less ones. They're a little bit less efficient than they are in something like Canadian Highlander or something like even Modern or Legacy, which I guess Legacy Burn is the thing, but it's not very common. That said, Dovin's Acuity is a card that kind of allows you to grind back up. Like, once you stabilize with, like, one of your time wipes or your end hostilities, or maybe they just had a very burn-heavy hand, not a lot of creatures, and you've mortified a thing or other-ended a thing, and, like, they just didn't have anything else. You start grinding with Dovin's Acuity and your cantrips, of which you have many instant-speed cantrips in the deck, and, you gain, like, somewhere between 6 and 20 life with this thing. I think this morning I gained from 7 to 23 or something like that. Just an absurd amount of life. I went up very high in life off Dovin's Acuity, which was pretty good. It's just an engine card, and it's quite good in this deck, especially, because this is a style of deck that will take a beating early. Like, you'll generally tend to stabilize around, like, anywhere between 1 to 4 life, and then just not get hit anymore. Thematic Compass. Honestly, in some matchups, you'd rather... I honestly always wish these cards, these style of lands, had... a May ability on them, so you don't have to flip them, because there are certain matchups where you just rather have Thematic Compass be Journeyer's Kite. But in general, this card's very strong. Against the aggressive decks, it does flip into something that's very relevant, which is a Maze of Ith, essentially, that still produces mana. And then against, like, your other blue decks in the mirror matches, or, like, against, like, grindy, kind of, like, green rock-based decks, like, being able to find extra cards, get extra cards out of your deck, even if they're just land cards, is very powerful, in my opinion. Now, it's for a lot of mana. This is 3 mana to activate the Thematic Compass, which costs 2, to find any basic land, but that's still a free card. Eternal Dragon, we already talked this. This is, again, just a card engine. Birth of Meletus. So I love this card a lot. This card doesn't see a lot of love in other formats. I've always wanted to play it in Canadian Highlander. It's a little slow at doing everything that it does. I always felt like if it put the wall down first, it may be a better card. Because, like, oftentimes in the style of deck, you're just taking a beat down, and you need a block for a little bit. And obviously the wall is the most protective component of the card itself. That said, this card is one that finds a land, puts an 0/4 onto the board and gains 2 life, which in general are like all things this deck is looking to do. It's looking to make sure it makes its land drops, looking to make sure that it doesn't die in the early to mid game, which the last 2 abilities do. And then Cling to Dust. Cling to Dust, I've talked on this card quite extensively in a lot of my videos since the card was printed. I'm a very big fan of the card and its utility. It just kind of has maximum utility, right? Like flexibility. In some matchups, it's going to be an utter bomb. In others, it's going to be incremental value. Either way, it's a pretty low opportunity cost to put a 1-mana card in your deck if you can cast it. And in most matchups, it's always going to be at least somewhat relevant, right? Gaining life is relevant in like half the matchups, and then like drawing cards is relevant in the other half. It's very often not the case that like no part of this can be relevant in some way, shape, or form. All right, our counter magic. So I broke out counter magic and then board interaction. I'll quickly highlight. This is the counter magic pile and the board interaction. Some of these cards in these piles kind of jump back and forth. Like Silumgar's Command can be board interaction, as can Drown in the Lock, but they've been put in the counter magic area. Just quickly run through them. We have Silumgar's Command, which is a counterspell for non-creatures, kills planeswalkers, bounces things, and can do -3/-3 to a creature. Ushitai's Command, this card is just good value. It's very expensive, but it's good value, and again, more life gain just to stay alive. Complicate, again, value. The format's a little slower than something like Canadian Highlander, so you can get away with Complicate. And honestly, just the flexibility of having cycling on it, even if you're not countering anything and you're just cycling at EOT, because you don't think Force Spike's going to be relevant anymore, it's just fine. Like, the card just, having cards that turn into new cards is quite good. Exclude, same story. Probably one of the most powerful 3-mana counter spells in this format. It's between this and Neutralize are probably my 2 favorite. Neutralize obviously has more utility because it doesn't only hit creatures, but Exclude, just drawing a card and countering a spell, is just, it's very good. Dissolve and Sinister Sabotage, both fine. I'm also playing Render Silent as a flex slot card right now. I could see cutting Render Silent and putting a different card in, But I've been pretty happy with it, honestly, because this deck will tend to want to, like, tap out. Like, so if you're in a blue mirror and you render silent one of the cards on their turn and then, like, tap out on their EOT for, like, a not search for tomorrow, where are you at, buddy? Pull from tomorrow or Thassa's Intervention. They can't counter, right? Because you rendered their first spell silent, so they can't cast spells for the rest of the turn, and then you basically have their EOT to resolve something. So in some ways, like, render silent is kind of like my quote-unquote, like, 3 mana Teferi Time Raveler in the blue mirrors. So you just, like, counter their spell, they try to counter your spell, and then, like, cast your big draw spell that basically puts you so far ahead that, like, they can't out-resource you. That's at least the idea behind it. Drown in the Lock, like I said, flexible, can kill things later on in the game, and can counter things early to mid. Dovin's Veto, great. Power Sink and Syncopate. These cards are not, like, exceedingly powerful, but they are basically 2-mana counters in the format, which the format does not have a premium of. Like, you don't have a lot of 2-mana counters. You're basically looking at, like, Memory Lapse, Mana Leak, Prohibit, Negate, Disdainful Stroke. Not really a ton. And actually, Memory Lapse is a card you could consider in this deck. I'm actually noticing that I'm not playing it, which is possibly wrong. Syncopate actually does have some additional relevance. Like, Genesis is a card. So the reason that, like, I like playing Cling to Dust is because there are cards in the format that have relevance inside the bin, to include Cling to Dust. You have Graveyard Lamia, which is reanimator stuff. You have Genesis, which in the green decks, I think Genesis is almost an auto-include. Genesis is very powerful. And against decks like this, like, you do not want to see Genesis. That's why I opted to even go into black. So it's like, Cling is just too good not to play. But Syncopate has that additional effect. You could play cards like, I believe it's Dissipate is legal at 3 mana as a 3-mana counter spell. I'm not all in on the 3-mana counter spell, so I don't have that card in the deck, but it's a fine one. I believe Forbid's also legal, and you could run Forbid in this deck, but I don't feel like this deck's card engine is resolute enough to be drawing, that many cards. Like, it's really good with, like, stuff like Consecrated Sphinx or, like, Standstill style decks, but, like, I don't think consistently we're seeing that many cards. I mean, generally speaking, you will end with the games with a lot of cards in hand, but I just don't think you have enough to run Forbid in this style of build. Logic Knot, 2-mana counter, very good. Prohibit, fine, a little awkward, but this card does scale, in my opinion. Like, even if it's late game against, like, a discard spell, this can be pretty good if someone's trying to, like, use a discard spell to get your good counter out of your hand. You can prohibit their discard spell. And 4 and under is pretty good, right? I mean, like, if it is late game and, like, they're casting a Planeswalker, Prohibit can get it, which is fine. One of the things that folks are decry on this card is that it's much worse on the draw than it is the play. That is utterly true. It's 100% correct. That said, like I said, it can scale over time, and it's not the worst. Not the best either. Negate, very high-quality card. Mana Leak, just great. Disdainful Stroke, been fine for me. There are some decks that don't play a ton of 4s, but almost every deck has some number of 4s, whether it's Planeswalkers, even like Hell Riders. Like, Red Deck Wins plays 4s in this format, like Tectonic Giant, just because they can't not play them. There's just not enough card density enough high-quality card density that's lower than that they can really get away with it. Or they could, but, like, their card quality would be so low at 1 and 2 that, like, they would really have not much hope at all against, like, the green-based mid-range decks, because, like, they would just have too many dogs in their 1 and 2 slots. They'd have a lot of, like, 1-mana 1/1s and stuff like that. So, Disdainful Stroke tends to get something in every matchup, even the most aggressive builds. Board Impact, Utter End, just, it's instant speed, exile target, non-land permanent. Just great removal. Ultimate flexibility, with the exception of lands, but it's instant speed, which is nice too. Banishing Light, in Oblivion Ring, kind of basically similar cards. They just get anything. They get walkers, whatever. Forsake the Worldly. I think some enchantments and artifacts can be quite important in the format. One that we could be playing in this list that I'm not, if we wanted to go more of an engine-style deck, is Trade Routes. Trade Routes in Mystic Sanctuary is pretty powerful. It's pretty dirtily. Not that this deck is not dirtily, but it's a card that in and of itself doesn't really do all that much. It requires a ton of mana. It's very slow, which is not to say this deck is not slow, but this deck does have a lot of incremental exchange occurring when it plays games. It's very interactive, right? And the more of those style of cards that you run, the less cards you have that are actually conducting that exchange and keeping you alive, right? So I think you want to limit those style of cards. I'm not opposed to running trade routes, but I don't think in general it's going to be for the best of the deck. I think the equity that it gives you in the matchups you're already good in is kind of nice, but I think it takes away from any equity you have in the matchups you're not good in. I.e., I don't really want to be tapping out for a trade routes first red deck wins. I just don't. I don't think it's going to help you any. I think it's going to kill you generally, but I could be wrong. All right. So moving on, but anyways, Forsake the Worldly does deal with some stuff. I don't know that anyone else is on Dovin's Acuity yet, but this card is a pain in the ass. It just kills people. Sylvan Library. There are some good equipments, actually, Captain's Claws is played in this format, which is actually not that bad. It's actually shockingly pretty good. Bone Splitters, there's some enchantment critters, there's quite a bit that it gets. I believe it's Annex. Annex is in the format. I've killed Annex with Forsake the Worldly. Mortify, just good removal. I have a textless version, but this is an instant speed, obviously Orzhov 1 card that destroys a creature or an enchantment. Pretty good. Vindicate, also just very good. Sorcery speed, but destroy any permanent. Sometimes it's a land. D-Spark. This card's really grown on me. I really like D-Spark quite a bit. Like I said, most every deck has 4 mana or greater cards. And just being able to nix a walker with this, because most of the walkers that are playable, I think all of them, there may be 1 or 2 3-mana walkers, like Domri's legal. Davriel might still be legal. But most of the Planeswalkers are 4 and up, and folks like playing Planeswalkers, but because they're good. They're very good cards, and T-Spark just deals with that, and or just big dumb creatures, just kills off easily. We have Warrant Warden and Azorious Charm. There's another half to this. It's the Warden half to this. You make a 4/4 Seer Angel, basically, for 5. I have used that once, I think. Typically, this is just an additional copy of Azorious Charms. Put a target attacking or blocking creature on top of owner's library. Is typically what it does. Just additional protection, just a removal spell to get basically to get cards out of play at advantage, or at parity rather. They're having to redraw that, and if it's an irrelevant creature that you don't really care about all that much, them having to draw it against pretty good. It's pretty brutal. Pretty savage. Into the Royal, just again gets a card off board that you don't want to have to deal with at the time, or have drawn counter magic for. After its resolution, and you just need a turn to get it off the board and have them replay it and counter it. This card does that. Set Adrift, another card that I really enjoy. This card, Sorcery Speed, which is unfortunate. It's pretty much what makes this card probably not Eternal playable. If it was an instant, I think this card would be very, very good. But anyway, this basically put a target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library, which is brutal. Submerge for 1 mana is still pretty good, and it's better than Submerge, right? Because it's not just doing it to creatures, it's doing it to any permanent. Again, kind of like Into the Royal or Azorious Charm and Warrant. You just get rid of something that you couldn't deal with before, you can't deal with now, and get another turn to draw to find an answer to it. Basically, stay alive kind of card. Repeal, same thing. At advantage, bounce a thing. Oust, Condemn, both pretty hard removal for most things. Both very good. Field of Ruin, this is the removal pile because it kills lands. This deck doesn't have issues with a ton of lands. There are a couple that it can. I believe Arch of Araska is legal in this format, but is not commonly played, and I don't believe I'm playing it in this deck. Urza's Factory is legal, which can be very problematic for this deck. There's a couple token-generating lands like its Factory, and I believe the Shrine of Vitu-Ghazi is legal, or I think that may not be the right name, but it's basically 2 plus Selesnya, tap, make a 1/1 Saproling token. There's a few cards that are like that you just don't want to have around because eventually they'll beat you. Also, card I'm not running but is legal, Kel'Jorn Outpost is also legal, and that's played in some decks like tokens. I like it in White Weenie decks because it's just a tough card for control style decks to beat because it just slowly grinds them out. Labyrinth of Scophos. This card's fine. It's kind of just it's a very expensive Maze of Ith, but it makes mana, and it's kind of free, right? I don't want to run too many lands that don't produce colors in this deck, but this one's of high enough quality that I think it's fine. Of note, it also deals with protection from white creatures, if that's for some reason relevant, you can't get an Azorious Charm off on a creature and you don't have a Wrath effect. So yeah, it's fine. This card's pretty good. The Wraths, I already kind of talked these. You have End Hostilities, all creatures, all permanents attached to them, so it does get equipment as well, which is kind of nice. Time Wipe. The part about bouncing one of your own creatures is not really that relevant in this deck. There's a couple that you could want to bounce. Like, you could want to bounce the Court Hussar, the Watcher for Tomorrow, or your Augur Bolus. But we're not playing cards like Elite Guard Mage in this deck or any other like mid-range threats. So, in general, Time Wipe's kind of just like it's a very good card at what it does, but like it's really just a destroy all creatures kind of card. And look at that art; that art's pretty cool. The card draw and the card draw at advantage, and then also the cantrips. So basically, our selection. This pile of cards is so I don't typically run this much selection in blue decks unless I'm looking to do a lot of this. So basically, the only reason that I'll tend to run this much card draw / selection is if I'm looking to have a higher volume of tap out style cards, which in this deck, Vice, something like Canadian Highlander, I am. Like in Canadian Highlander, typically I'm running like 2 Wraths, and one of them is 1 mana. It's Terminus, right? And then maybe Supreme Verdict, and then like I'm good. Like I don't think I need more than that. You could run Time Wipe in that list as well, but I think you're probably just better off with Supreme Verdict and Terminus if you're on the Mystical Tutor package. But anyway, so the more of this I'm doing, the more card draw I want, because I'm in effect, I am a control deck. You could call it a combo control deck. Technically you're winning with Approach of the Second Sun. It's really just a control deck. It's not a great combo. It's just I'm going to draw enough cards to get to this thing. And these are the cards that kind of let you do that, right? They let you find what you need when you need to find it, because, it's magic, right? We're playing control. We have to be ready for a lot of different things. Sometimes you want this sort of stuff, and sometimes you want this sort of stuff, right? And you're not always going to draw that naturally. So you have to draw a lot of cards. Draw early, draw often. So go running down this. You have Chemist's Insight, Factor Fiction, Hieroglyphic Illumination. Jumpstart is very good in these style of decks because, like I was saying, your card function can fail to line up with what's actually relevant in the game that you're in, and having the ability to just pitch off an Oblivion Ring to try to find an Exclude or try to find a Render Silent can be very good. Mystical Teachings, just very good card. Pull from Tomorrow, Thassa's Intervention. So this is technically a counter spell as well, but it's more often than not I find I am using this to find 2 cards, to find the best 2 cards in the top X or whatever I'm looking at. Compulsive Research, pretty slow, but honestly, again, this is the style of deck that's comfortable tapping out on turn 3 for a Compulsive Research, because it's looking to do this, right? Like, you're going to tap out and be like, hey, go ahead, do whatever you're going to do, and then they do their best thing, and then eventually you do one of these, and then, you just kill or counter everything that comes down after that. Cortisar, just a good blocker, and impulses for something, so you get to, not impulses, it anticipates. So you look at the top 3 cards, you have to have paid white to not have this thing die when it comes into play, which is a really weird old cost. But it's a 1/3 vigilance, and you look at the top 3 and put 1 in your hand, which is pretty good. And it's any style of card too, it's not just sorceries or instants. You have Forbidden Alchemy. This card's awesome as well. Like, building up your bin for cards like Cling to Dust, or for return equity on Mystic Sanctuary is pretty good. So I've been very happy with this card. I mean, it's very expensive, but in general, this deck is fine going to 3 mana to get some good card selection, because, again, it's looking to do this. And in general, sometimes this helps find this style of stuff right here. Shimmer Possibility. Control decks in more standard formats are not really looking to play this style of card. But again, we are looking to essentially come back from behind. We are a tap-out style deck. The format is significantly slower, and we don't have access to cards like Ponder, and Brainstorm, and Preordain, and Serum Visions, etc., etc. We've got Opt, We used to have Peak. We don't have Peak anymore. So, you make do with what you got, and Shimmer is just fine with what we got. Watcher Tomorrow, his card's fine. Again, it's just a blocker, not the turn it comes into play. And it also impulses for the best card in the top 4 of your deck. So when it dies, you get it back, and typically it dies pretty fast. I find this thing gets cold very rapidly. Telling Time, again, just a trip. It's fine. It does. It's a role player. It gets you closer to this card sooner. Radical idea again, like you have pretty variable card relevance given the matchup you're in. So having access to just discarding the worst card in your hand to draw a new card is generally going to be pretty good. Omen of the Sea card is just fine. I love this card actually. This card's really cool. Latinam's Legacy card's also quite good. Gets rid of the worst card in your hand, gets you 2 new ones. Augur Bolus blocks, trades, and gets you a card in your deck. As you can see, we're running 4 creatures, so it's probably going to hit. I don't think I've ever had it miss in this deck. Renewed Faith. This card's just good. Like sometimes you cast this, hard cast this to gain 6 life because that's just what you need. Like you've stabilized against red deck wins creatures, and you're just worried about like double bolt. So you gain 6, and maybe you're at 8 because you were at 2 before, and they can't double bolt you. So you're out of range of that. Revitalize again. Against the really aggressive decks, it trades off with like 1 burn spell in their hand, and replaces itself with a new card. I've also cast this in response to like someone casting a Gaia's Revenge, and I was like, "Welp, I can't counter that." I had like an excluding hand in this, and like I was like, "Welp, I can't counter that." And I was at 8 exactly, so I was going to die to it. So I cast this thing, went up to 11, got attacked down to 3, and then popped a land for Mystic Sanctuary and got my time wipe back and time wiped the Gaia's Revenge. This card can just keep you alive, right? That's kind of the idea behind it. I never looked at the art either. There's like some dude drinking a beer behind a wall with arrows flying over it. It's pretty cool. Well, it's a potion. I like to think it's a beer. Anyway, anticipate. Yep. This is just anticipate. Finds you what you need. Opt. Yep, it's opt. It's fine. It's one of the worst of the cantrips, but that's probably why it costs a penny on Moto, right? Mystic Sanctuary, just fine. Like I said, you can like make this deck more of an engine and play a card like Trade Routes in the deck. It may seem kind of odd to run Mystic Sanctuary in a format with no fetch lands, but you actually do have fetch lands. They're bad fetch lands, like Bad River and Flooded Plains. Or Floodplain, rather, where you have Floodplain. So you actually have 2 cards that can find Mystic Sanctuary. That's, if I didn't, I don't know how often I would run Mystic Sanctuary, but it actually comes up, and Mystic Sanctuary is quite good in these style of decks. It's pretty good in most blue decks that have sizable enough islands, or sizable enough volume of islands. Decree Justice, I've never hardcast this, but, if you're not familiar with Decree, really the relevant part of it is cycling for white 2. And when you cycle it, you can pay X, and you make X 1/1 white soldier tokens. And obviously, you draw a card as well. Card's pretty good. Like, it's quite good. And, like, in older formats, like, it was a rock star. Is it nowadays? Not really. Eventually this turned into Entreat the Angels. Was like the remake of this card that was very, very powerful. But this card's no slouch either. And the fact that it actually has cycling and it makes the creatures as a byproduct of a trigger is kind of nice because it can't be countered. At least without like Void Slime or something like that. Which I believe Void Slime may be legal in this format. But there's not a lot of stifle effects. There are some. There's a couple that are legal. And then just approach. So that's the deck, guys. It's very simple. 39 lands. Very landed deck. Which is probably a sizable step away from like how the Canadian Highlander builds this deck are. They're normally 37 in a tithe. But again, your spells on average are more expensive, so you just tend to need more mana. And here is the curve right here. I guess we can doctor it up a little bit. This is a 2-mana spell. This is basically a 2-mana spell. And in general, this is kind of what you're looking at. This is kind of how the deck tends to look and play. I suppose this can go down here as well. Very, very fun deck to play. Generally speaking, you're always going to have interesting lines when you're playing the deck. And they vary. They vary between matchups. So what I'm going to do now is going to quick pause, and then I'm going to jump into some gameplay. I have 4 games that I'll showcase with the deck against a variety of different decks in the format, and we'll call it there. So quick break, guys. I'll be right back. Alright, guys, we're back. Playing against a Winds Marvel here. This hand's acceptable. It's got white mana, it's got blue mana, it's got a Decree, Forsake, and then Opt. So this hand could be most anything. I don't think you pitch these back. It doesn't really have a very exceedingly clear plan. We don't know what our opponent's playing. This is a game 1. This is actually probably the first time in this format I've ever played Winds Marvel, so I have no clue what they're even up to. I go ahead and take the Set Adrift here. I don't have access to black mana. There was a Drown in the Loch in that pile, as well as a couple lands, but my hand's pretty landed. I could have taken a black mana source, I believe, but it was tapped. I don't mind getting to 3 this turn untapped, just in case I need to forsake the worldly on something or opt. I believe Fevered Visions is legal in this format. That could be incorrect, though. But they're playing a blue-red deck, and right now what I'm trying to figure out in my gameplay is, are they on a tempo variety of the deck, a mid-range variety, or like an all-out big control variety of it? I don't know that yet. My guess is that they're going to be the beatdown because, typically speaking, blue-red has to progress the game state against blue-white. Blue-white tends to be advantaged long-term versus them, unless they're in a more red variety of the deck. The more aggressive they get, the harder the matchup gets for us. The more controlling they get, in my opinion, the easier the matchup gets for us. I go ahead and cycle Decree of Justice off here. I'm probably not winning with it, and I just want to find my next land drop. Unfortunately, I miss here, so I'm not going to be making a land drop for the turn. Get in there with my soldier token. I believe they fire Impulse my soldier, and I'm like, that's fine. That's A-okay with me. I'm going to go ahead and draw with Hieroglyphic Illumination on end step. They don't go for a counter spell on it. Draw a bazillion lands here, which is good. I mean, I kind of wanted to have one last turn. I missed my land drop, but that's fine. It is what it is. I now have Eternal Dragon, so I can start that engine up. I go ahead and cast a Lutri out here. I could have excluded that, but I don't really like tapping onto my EOT here. If they have a 4-mana or a 5-mana Planeswalker, I can kind of just get owned by that. I'd rather have access to like my Disdainful Stroke. I can deal with Lutri. I'm not too worried about getting beat down by that small of a creature. I do go ahead and Logic Knot here. I'm not sure if this is correct, but my assumption is that their hand is probably a lot of irrelevant cards if they're trying to Fire Prophecy this card. Plus, I kind of want to cause a fight. This gets an Incinerate out of their hand as well, which is one Incinerate that's not going to my face. It's less clock. And I'm still able to leave up Disdainful Stroke plus exclude. I go for a Fact or Fiction EOT. They do go ahead and complicate this, which is kind of a beating, but it's on their EOT, so I mean, I have the next untap. Which means that I'm just going to set a Drifter Lutri. Putting Lutri back on top is not the best, because like if they do have a relevant draw spell, they can try to copy it with Lutri. The thing is, I kind of want them to cast Lutri in combination or in concert with a draw spell so I can exclude the Lutri and get some value. And right now, like, as you can see, like, Time Wipe is kind of awkward against these tempo decks because, like, they don't have to play more than one threat out. They can kind of just ride a threat out, and that can just win the game all on its own. Not very quickly, but, you know, like, you don't want to take too many Lutri beats because then, like, their Incinerate effects start becoming pretty relevant, right? I believe I just untap here. My plan is to go for a Time Wipe this turn or to go for an Into the Royal. Yeah, no, I go for an Into the Royal. I didn't want to tap low there because I could have gotten mana leaked. My option I have to do here is on their upkeep, go ahead and kick Into the Royal, paying for mana leak or like Revolutionary Rebuff / Quench, and then having access to Disdainful Stroke. I let them just dump their hand here. This is great for me. Bazaar Trader Mage is not like great for me because they're probably going to get more good cards and get rid of bad ones out of their hand. They get rid of a Pillar and Electrostatic Field, which means to me their hand's probably really aggressive now. They correctly assessed that like they need to be aggressive here. But this gives me access to Time Wiping. I really didn't want to cast a 5-mana spell unless I was getting a 2 or 3 for 1. I'm going to go ahead and take my 2 for 1 because I don't think they're likely to expand onto the board much more. And I think if I take 6, I make a lot more of the cards in their deck relevant at that point. I go for Disdainful Stroke here, but they have a 3-mana counterspell, Sinister Sabotage, which is unfortunate, but the Ral is not going to be able to do that much this turn. It's going to scry 1, and then I'm just going to blow it up with Vindicate and have access to card draw on the following turn. So go ahead and Vindicate this. Go for the card draw immediately. Just find some stuff, some removal, basically. I'm going to try to keep that land in hand because I would like to be able to pitch it for Jumpstart on the Chemist's Insight. Go ahead and find I get back the Into the Royal here. I go ahead and try to cast the Oblivion Ring. They cast a Mana Leak. I'm just going to pay for this. They have a 1/1 in play, and I have it Into the Royal. Actually, part of the reason I got Into the Royal is I figured there might be a counterspell fight. On my turn, to protect the Planeswalker, and Into the Royal trades pretty favorably with a token. I don't feel bad about using a removal spell on it because it replaces itself, and I don't get beat down forever by a 1/1. Which doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but I'm playing blue-white, approach. Like, a 1/1's going to add up over time. Like, I'm going to need to deal with it. I'd rather not be using Condemn to deal with it. I'd rather deal with it with, like, Into the Royal where it's, like, not a disadvantage to me. So, I do go ahead and Condemn here just for mana efficiency, and because Into the Royal has more relevant targets than Condemn does, and I'm already kind of up on the cards at this point. At this point, I feel like there's probably not a lot of ways I can lose. They're going to go for a Frantic Search, which means they will discard 2, but they'll find their best card in the top 2. I'm going to start getting back Eternal Dragon, which in general means I'm probably winning. Getting back Eternal Dragon every turn is, well, it's very mana intensive, but it's also quite powerful. They're going to go ahead and expand onto the board again, which to me, again, is fine. Like, I don't have a Wrath here, but I can go ahead into the Royal one of their cards, which I believe I go for, the Electromancer. Get a Thassa's Intervention, which I'm ideally going to be using to find my approach. I find approach here, which I believe I go to cast. And I tell them to go. On their upkeep, I'm just going to go ahead and utter end this card. I could leave up Thassa's Intervention, but my plan is to use Thassa's Intervention on the following turn to find my approach directly on their EOT, and I have a Dovin's Veto to kind of back that up. I just go ahead and cast the Eternal Dragon out because they're not attacking through that with a 2/2. They go ahead and cast an Adir Kraken. Say go. I don't go for the full Monty here. They have one card left in hand. I'd rather not get, counterspelled on this. So I'm only going to get 3 deep here, but I believe my approach is one more card down, and I'm not really in a position where I think I can lose very easily. They're going to get to make some 1/1s with their Nadir Kraken, but they don't have great attacks through the Labyrinth. I also have Warrant in hand, and I have a hard counter for basically anything outside of Counter Flux that's likely in their deck. I believe approach is one more card down. But again, Kraken's not going to really do that much. They basically have to try to look scary and be like, I got the counter. I don't think they do, but if they do, it's got to be pretty specifically Counter Flux. So we go ahead and cast the approach here, and I believe call it a game. Yep. All right, quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2 against Wynn's Marvel. All right, guys, we're back, and what do we got? This hand's great. It's got some removal. It's got some selection. I mean, I don't know if it's great, but it sees a lot of cards, that's for sure. Go ahead and lead off on an island here. They play out their Electromancer. I'm like, yeah, okay, 2/2. I think I oust that immediately. Yeah, I just ousted immediately. I don't want to give them a mana savings on their spells this early. I feel like if you're drawing that in the mid-game, it's significantly worse. They have it here, but it's kind of an interesting play because they know there's a goblin on top, so they just exile their goblin, which in general I'm kind of fine with. I believe I go for a compulsive here because I'm very land heavy, and I kind of wanted to get some board impacting cards. Again, I really want to Wrath of God once, just one time, or a removal spell because again, this card will kill me. I take Chemist's Insight as opposed to Birth of Meletus, which is the other viable option in that pile of 4. Mostly just to grind some cards out. Thassa's Intervention for 1. Not really how you want to cast this card, but they must really need the land, which is understandable. I've definitely cast it for 1 if I really need my land drop for a 4-drop spell or 2 2-drops. They're going to just go for the Gusto here. I believe they try to burn me out, basically. So they go for Opt. They go for a burn spell. And I believe they may have one more even. They hit me for a lot of damage this turn, which is a very sensible line of play. I like their line of play. I mean, it's risky. There's some risk associated. If I have Warrant Warden or Azorious Charm, they can just get kind of blown up there. I play out my 1/3, and my hope here is that maybe it's possible that they haven't they don't have more burn. Maybe I'm able to block with this thing. I'm not able to block with this thing. I have to let that happen. I am going to go ahead and counter the Arc Lightning with my Mana Leak. But they're still going to hit me for 4 and get me down to 7 life total. I go ahead and cast Silumgar's Command and bounce their tapped land and kill their creature, which is pretty good. So I'm at 7. I'm feeling pretty good at this point, or at least not horrible. They cast the Direfleet Daredevil. I think I'm obliged to counter this. I have a lot of good stuff in my bin. I would rather them not draw a bazillion cards off of my cards that I have in my bin. So I'm going to say no. I'm also going to go for an EOT Chemist's Insight, which seems fine. Opt. Like Latnam's Legacy's fine too. I can get rid of probably this Field of Ruin or whatever. So I don't think at this point, exact point, I need more lands. I go ahead and leave up my mana here. I think I'm better off leaving up access to Chemist's Insight over Watcher, and I'm going to be drawing 2 cards in their upkeep. Chandra's Phoenix is really bad for me. This card is not a card I really want to see. I'm not very happy to see it. I go ahead and repeal it back to hand so I can kind of generate some more options, figure out what I'm doing about it. Go ahead and cast Watcher for tomorrow. Looking for something useful. Find Oblivion Ring, which can deal with the Phoenix, which is kind of nice. Can also cast Chemist's Insight at instant speed if need be. So I do go ahead and just believe... What am I doing right now? I'm casting Thassa's Intervention. Alright, so I'm making them pay a burn spell to play this again. I kind of feel like they have burn spells in hand with the way they played this, a ton of them. They do. They have Arc Trail, and they're going to damage my thing and then damage my face. Give me this Oblivion Ring, and then get the Phoenix back to hand. The issue with Phoenix is, it's pretty much always going to hit me. At least once, because it has haste, and unless I have a direct kill spell for it, I'm not going to be able to easily deal with it. I can set a drift it, but then it just comes back down again. I could drown in the locket here to actually save a damage, but my thinking is if they go for a burn spell, I could actually just drown in the lock the burn spell, and then I'll look to cast Oblivion Ring on it on the following turn. I think I missequenced this line. I think I should have cast out Birth of Meletus first to have the additional land first, but I don't think it really matters all that much. And now I have access to Disdainful Stroke plus Drown in the Lock on their next turn. So I'm feeling like I'm in a pretty good place. I'm not in I'm not in a horrible spot here. I believe they try to go ahead and cast a 5-drop here. It is Devil's Play. I go ahead and Disdainful Stroke the Devil's Play. I don't feel like dying right now. Go ahead and get rid of the Merciless Eviction with the Jumpstart card, the Jumpstart draw card. I don't think Eviction's going to be that great in this matchup. At this point, I feel like this game's going to be about dealing with singular threats, not like a massive volume of threats. So they play PNLR. I allow this one to happen, mostly because I have access to Into the Royal, which means I can bounce their token, and then just leave them with a Pia. For this, find Factor Fiction. I could have taken Condemn there, but I think Factor Fiction is going to put me in better stead to win the long game, which is what I'm trying to angle for right now. But if they just have removal for my wall, I could be in trouble, right? I may have to drown in the lock the Pia, because I really don't want to take another hit. Try to unsubstantiate here. I go for a Factor Fiction. I believe this dredges a counter spell out of them. I go ahead and counter their counter spell because I think drawing a card here is more relevant than yeah, I take the 2 pile. I think it's more relevant than drawing the cards is more relevant than protecting this wall. I mean, if I take 2, I take 2. But now, like, the jig's kind of up. Like, the Arc Trail and the Devil's Play were their burn spells. I think their burn spells have been expended at this point. So I feel like, they really, if they're fighting over the fact what they really care about is already on board and they're trying to draw more to play to the board, but they don't per se have it. Forbidden Alchemy at this point is not bad either. They have PNLR again, which we knew was coming back, but my plan was to bounce that thing and then end hostilities in the following turn to deal with the whole card. And then ideally, hopefully not die to a tap out here, but go for a tap out on their EOT to cast Forbidden Alchemy. I could have taken the, it may have made more sense to take the Thematic Compass. I take the life gain land because I'm more worried about burn at this point. I feel like I can deal with permanence really well based on my hand, but I am going to have issues interacting on the stack with this hand as it stands right now. So I just take interim life gain here. Opponent goes ahead and plays a Murmuring Mystic. I go ahead and wait until my untap just in case they have like a mana-based answer to this card. I go ahead and set it adrift. I kind of felt like they had something, like they were going to get a 1-1 out of this in some way, shape, or form. This makes a lot of sense to me. I go ahead and get the Labyrinth down so I can turn the bird around. We know they're redrawing the 1/5, and I'll be able to like despark it or banishing light it on the following turn. I just kind of wanted them to redraw that because I know I can deal with that in hand, and they were going to get a 1/1 anyway. We dealt with it. So they also have Electrostatic Field, which I allow to resolve as well, but they want to keep the Mystic in hand because I think they assume that I can counter it, which actually I can't counter the Mystic right now. The Electrostatic Field is something that I'm going to have to deal with because like it's just going to chip up quite a bit over time. So I just go ahead and banish and light it. I'm out of Wrath effects. If I had a Wrath effect, I'd probably give it one turn just to sit and see if I get them to come off their one threat at a time kind of thing they got going on over there right now. So yeah, one of the things in this game that we kind of miss out, even though we're 44 or down to 44 cards in deck, is that we kind of miss out on engines. I can't deal with our Saheeli, which is problematic. That's a big problem right there. That's a big oof. And I'm like, well, maybe I should have let the electrostatic wall sit around and not banishing lighted it. But it is what it is, right? Yeah, some of the big things we kind of miss out on this game is just drawing the engine cards. And as you can see, we have a lot of lands in play too. Like we've flooded a bit, but this is a 39 land deck, so it is prone to that happening. But ideally, like if you find like a mystical teachings or like any of like Dovin's Acuity, those style of cards will tend to allow you to kind of grind through. Once you get to these points at which it seems like you stabilized, it's not very often the deck like stabilizes and then just like kind of gets out top decked, which we kind of do in this matchup right here. Their deck's obviously set to be more aggressive, and like they're going to in general have independently more relevant cards that end the game. But they're not going to have as high a volume of cards that just like randomly that draw more cards, right? That grind this hard. So, yep. So we go ahead and despark here. I think there's a consideration as to whether I cycle neutralize or not there. I didn't really want to yet, and part of the rationale is that they still have a Devil's Play in the bin. So if I do cycle it and don't find something relevant, then I'm very dead to Devil's Play. So I think it effectively does the same thing to leave it in hand here because I'm not dead to this attack step. And more than likely I'm not dead, period, this turn. And if they end up doing nothing, other than just attack me for 2 here to put me to 4, I probably will look to cycle it on the EOT here, just because I will be more than likely dead on the following turn just to attacks. They go for Burst Lightning, which is for 4 damage, and again, this is another spell that can have this effect. I go for a Neutralize on it because I will be dead to it if I don't, and now I know Devil's Play is going to be lethal out of the bin, and if I draw a land, which I do, then I basically have to pack it in. I go ahead and concede here. Yep, just drew a lot of lands. And again, like I said, that's the thing that can happen with the deck. I do think we played decently well in this game. I have to go really look difficult. I have to look very hard to see if there was anything that was like kind of suspect. Thematic Compass not being picked up could have been suspect. It makes a bit of a difference here, but not a huge difference. It finds one additional land out of the deck, so maybe that thinning would have made it better. But yeah, Thematic Compass over like a Tranquil Cove. But at the time, we didn't have counter spells in hand, so I think we had to. I think we were getting from like 6 to 7, and I think 6 to 7 is a pretty big jump versus a lot of the red-based spells in the format. So I don't know. Kind of a tough one to lose, and one that you look at once you lose, and like you have to like really think because you're like, my deck kind of did what I got to a point where I was supposed to get, which is like the turn in these style of games, but I didn't lock it up. So when you have a game like that, I think it is one that like generally makes you think like, is there an issue in the construction? And I played this deck a lot, so I don't think there is. I think it was just, we ran a little poorly, and hit too much of the part of our deck that we really didn't want to hit in that part of the game, and our opponent hit what they needed to hit, like good threat, like basically a threat engine. Saheeli, it's just not an exceedingly interactive card. Once it has gotten in play, because then like every cantrip is just a threat at that point, which is problematic. So yeah, kind of just get swamped by Saheeli and by some bird tokens, and just hit a lot of lands. So unfortunate. Anyways, quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 3 against Wins Marvel. Alright, folks, we're back, and this hand's perfectly reasonable. It is lacking in black mana, but we could use Field of Ruin to kind of help fix that, to turn the Mortify on if we need that card. And we also got some cantrips, some cantrips and some lands. It's kind of what you're hoping for. Also hoping for them not to have an exceedingly fast start. If they have a very blisteringly fast start, we can be in trouble. They have a decent one. I mean, they got a decent. They have a 2-drop. They've mulliganed down, though, I believe, to 6 in this game. I go ahead for a telling time, take a counter spell for the next turn. I believe leave it into the Royal on top for turn 4. As far as like my mental sequencing goes. But the plan is here, leave up neutralized, then the following turn into the Royal, their best thing on their EOT after taking a hit from it. So take the 2. Warkite Marauder's is a cool card. It actually has a cool interaction in this game that I recall with Searcher for Tomorrows. So we're just taking our licks here. I get rid of the black card, the expensive black card there, because I just don't have black mana yet, and because they haven't exposed any way for me to use my Field of Ruin to actually find black mana. At this point, I need an additional white source as well. They cast a Pennylander here. I go ahead and Mana Leak her. I just kind of want to, bide some time here. I don't have a Wrath effect. There's the Watcher. Find another island. That's fine. You see Revitalize get cast here as well. That nice incremental life gain basically buys a turn and a half off the Warkite Marauder and just gets us one deeper. Put a Factor Fiction into this card. Warkite Marauder and the way Watcher's written interact in a funny way. So you'll actually see Warkite Marauder turn my creature into an 0/1 that has no abilities. Then they'll be able to burn it off, and I won't get the Factor Fiction, which is a little awkward. But I mean, it took cards to do it, so I'm kind of comfortable with that. And I'm able to cast Into the Royal. They actually counter my Into the Royal, which I'm kind of happy with. I'm happy to get that counter spell out of their hand because I'm not exceedingly worried about the 2 damage every turn. I'm just more concerned about being able to get them to tap their mana and then cast a massive pull for tomorrow on my turn. I'm tapping out and assuming some risk here, but I'm drawing 5 cards. I'll have to pitch one of them, so I'm effectively drawing 4. But drawing 4 cards is no joke, and my opponent's down to 2 cards, and I'm at a relatively healthy life total. I'm going to take 2 off this. They hit me for 4, but they're down to 2 cards at this point with 2 mana up. I have basically infinite counter spells. I have a kill spell at this point, which I'm going to be able to turn online via using my Field of Ruin on their Desolate Lighthouse. I do go ahead and go for a Neutralize on the Morpheer, which is a Stratus Dancer. Then go ahead and cast Mortify on the Chandra's Phoenix. If they have a burn spell, they could throw it at my face here to get the Chandra's Phoenix back. But my plan is I have Power Sink in hand. I can, at a minimum, kind of bide time against the Phoenix and force them to kind of just waste their burn spells, throwing them directly at my face and not really impacting the board in a proactive way. Alright, so a lot of creatures in this draw. They're very aggro control-y. But I've got them down to 1 card, and I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot. They've drawn a few more lands than they did last game. I go ahead and Mystic Sanctuary, the pull from tomorrow. I'm not going to cast it right away. It's not likely they have a counter spell as their last card hand. It's likely it's a land card. But I'm not in a rush to cast this card. I have compulsive research to do next turn. I have a pretty good counter spell when you're at mana advantage like we are right now in the form of Power Sink. So, like I said, I'm not in a rush. I do take the Azorious Charm here. Plan is to go for compulsive research here, end up pitching the Boneyard, put a Plains into play. And yeah, just outcard them. As you can see, we're in the phase of the game where we've stabilized the board and we're just grinding cards. Just get as deep as we can and find our win con. Azorious Charm Exclude's not a bad one. I assume it's most likely they're going to try to win with a creature, but they could do it with a walker as well. We saw Saheeli in the last game. Go ahead and cast a pull, leaving up our counter magic in the process of doing it. And we're now at 8, so I mean we're at a pretty reasonable life total as far as stabilization goes. OP goes for an X burn spell, probably Craterous Claws or the Devil's Play. It is Claws. I just go for a Power Sink on this for 1, because I mean I figure Power Sink is more annoying to leave up, especially if they cast an efficient low end spell that I want to counter. I probably want to just use Prohibit on it. Go for another look here. End up just taking the basically the draw 4 card, the Chemistry's Insight off Forbidden Alchemy. Just again, because at this point I kind of want to just find a way to win. I don't want to let the game continue to go on. I'm going to go ahead and exclude this. Find End Hostilities. It's fine. It's not really great in this matchup, but it's okay. Go for a Mystical Teachings, I believe. No, we're recasting this. I'm going to recast this. Find the Thematic Compass. I'll have a Maze of Ith.
I believe I used to find a land here too. I think I find a swamp with it because I want access double black. I don't need double black for any given card in my deck, but it makes it so I'm able to cast cards like Cling to Dust multiple times in a turn cycle, which can be relevant. Especially because right now I feel like their plan's got to be to try to burn me out in some way. I don't think they can reasonably expect that they're going to be that effective in resolving creatures at this point, or trying to win through non-instant speed kill spells. So, just kind of hanging out, doing the blue white thing at this point. This is kind of the phase of the game where like blue white obviously shines. We're bottoming every land we find, trying to just look for win cons here. They try to go for a magma jet. They're like, all right, you're a little low on mana. I go ahead and prohibit it. I still have a counter spell. I do keep the render silent on top, bottom another land card. Because I'm pretty set on lands at this point. I've acquired the mana advantage I was looking for. And at this point, basically the game's kind of just a formality. This game goes on for a long time, though. So I kind of fail to find what I need to find. Like at this point, all I want to do is find approach, and then just draw back to approach again. So I'm finding stuff like Thassa's Intervention. I'm on a render silent right now, so I get to basically do this with no chance of repercussion for my opponent, as far as countering my spell or burning my face. So I go for a 7 here. I just take the card draw and a counter spell because I didn't find approach off the top 7 there. Go ahead and cycle the Renewed Faith. See what we can see. Find a Latinam's Legacy. Probably get rid of the End Hostilities here, be my guess. Yep, it's pretty bad. I'd rather just have Utter End because, again, like they're just going to resolve like one good threat, and I just want to kill the one good threat they resolve. Alright, draw Merciless Eviction and Oust. Seems fine. Go ahead and Hyro. Down to 32 cards. As you can see, this deck can draw itself pretty quickly. I allow Nadir Kraken to resolve. I don't think they probably have a cantrip in hand. I can just oust this card. And if they end up having a cantrip, I can Merciless Eviction if worse comes to worse. I kind of want them just to redraw that card because I don't think it's that relevant. Find my last planes. So down to 30 in deck. Just working away at it. But we've kind of used all of our card draw. Like we've used most of our card draw, most of our card selection, and like just not found what we needed to find. But we're going to use Mystical Teachings here, and I believe, what do we get at this point? I forget what we even get. It may literally be like an Anticipate variant. Or just a counter spell. I can't recall. Maybe Ocean Dice coming out. Cling. Cling makes sense. Cling's sensible. Like it's an engine card. But I'm very low on clock at this point in just Moto terms, so like I'm playing as quickly as I can with this deck, but this deck is very time intensive. We get Cling and Dovin's Acuity going, which is a sight to behold. We're basically unkillable at this point. I end up finding Decree, so I'm just going to cycle off the Decree here and try to kill them with that. This is like 9 1/1s or something. It's a ridiculous amount of 1/1s that will kill pretty quickly. And I assume that some number of them will likely die to burn spells. I kind of feel like that's likely what they're holding in hand. Is cards that are templated as creature removal and or lands. Alright, Negate's not a bad one. It just can't find approach though. Just can't do it. Have not seen it the whole game. At this point, I am just trying to thin the deck. At this point, like thinning does matter. 22 cards you've drawn. It's a 21 turn game. Thinning's going to matter at this point. Oh, okay. Why would I not have attacked there? I think the game may have broken. Yeah, this replay unfortunately broke, guys. This is not how this played. I attacked them, and I think utter-ended that card. I believe. Yeah, no, they pay 5 to do that. They concede in pretty short order. I get down very low on clock. I actually attack them, I believe, twice, the soldier tokens, and they're down to like 9. And then they jokingly chain lightning themselves like 3 times. I never did end up finding the approach in this game. I was just going to win with tokens. But obviously my clock was very low. But they were at like, I think, 11 or 12 at this point because I attacked them twice with the tokens. But the game's misremembering itself. But you kind of saw the gist of the game. After you get past the turn and stabilize, it doesn't really tend to matter. Like I've kind of said in the beginning, like you can just win with a wooden shoe, which in this case is a bunch of crappy little soldier tokens. and they're not going to do much because you're sitting on dissolve, sinister sabotage, complicate, negate, utter end, banishing light, blah 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 blah. Maze of Ith, whatever. So yeah, Cling to Dust. Oof, just just all of it. Anyways, so that is this game, guys. We managed to get blue red. I'd call it blue red tempo, blue red spells. In a match here, and we'll jump forward to the next game that we've got for you. Alright guys, back, and we're playing against Garrick's Gardener here. So, this hand's very close. If I hit a white mana source, I'm pretty happy with this hand. I'm on the draw, which is one of the big reasons I keep this hand. Typically speaking, you want to have pretty good mana in your hands. This hand does lack on mana. The one thing that kind of goes in this hand's favor is that because we're on the draw, we have that additional draw step, and we have Power Sink into Exclude to kind of get through cards, and Power Sink is a very feasible turn 2 counter spell. So, anyway, we have not hit lands. We've hit one card that requires lands that we don't have right now, and then another that requires just one more land. I am pretty happy to see Forbidden Alchemy, though, because if I see any additional land, then I'll be able to cast that and or Exclude, and Forbidden Alchemy is going to help find my next white source. I'm pretty comfortable saying that in the top 4 I can probably find a white mana source. Unfortunately, we missed all 3 draw steps, not lands. So that is unfortunate, and that is one of the risks of this hand. That's why I was dubious about keeping it, but I did. I also didn't have any clue what they'd be playing. It appears to be some sort of red-green mid-range deck, maybe aggressive. When I see Rattleclaw and Tranquil Thicket and Arbor Grazer, I think more mid-range. But Sir Farron, I think it is Sir Farron, is a pretty reasonable card to play in mid-range as well. Alright, getting in there. I'm getting my butt beat here. I'm just getting beat down by these 2/2s. They cast a Fertile Footsteps to get another land drop. I'm just going to go ahead and I believe cast the Oceanize command just for card draw and land here. Or I'm sorry, in life. If they have burn in hand, I don't want to just rando die. I go ahead and time wipe here. They're probably going to try to get down something this turn. They do not. I'm like, okay, that's kind of nice. I go ahead and get my Bad River down because my Bad River is just going to give me access to Mystic Sanctuary. They can get back the time wipe or the Oceanize command or condemn or whatever. They have Gaia's Revenge, and I'm like, oh Jesus, I can't counter that one with Exclude. So I have to Revitalize here so I don't die to the attack of this thing. If you're not familiar with Gaia's Revenge, can't be countered, has haste, can't be the target of non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources. So you can't Maze of Ithis or Labyrinth of Scophos it either. So I have to Wrath it. I just go ahead and Wrath here. I misplayed this turn. I should have played Birth of Meletus out first. After draw, I should play Birth of Meletus out to get an additional land. I would have been tapped out that way, but if you're basically tapping out anyways, you should just do it. I would have been sure I got my land drop that turn. That was a poor play on my part. They cast Paradise Druid, which is fine. I debate excluding this, and I rethink it, and I'm like, man, that's really stupid. I really want to cast Fact or Fiction here and just get deeper in my deck. I'm going to have an 0-4 wall next turn that can block this 2-1. I think I'm fine with it. The one risk that you run with, Paradise Druid that I was considering is if they have a bunch of pump spells, they can just pump it up before combat, and I'm not going to be able to condemn it or remove it in some way, shape, or form. Which is one thing that worries me a little bit about it. But I don't think you should burn and exclude on a Paradise Druid at this point in the game, especially with an 0-4 wall in play. So OP goes for a Savage Swipe here, and I'm like, well, this is one of the things I worried about. This will kill me as well. So I have to go for Mystical Teachings, find Dovin's Veto here, veto this card. I believe they're just going to cast out, Nikia, a big 5/5 that basically murders me and makes them have bazillion mana in play, basically. I think it doubling cubes all their mana. I would get Azorious Charm, which means the Nikia can't really attack very well. And hang out. Kind of just hang out. I know they have a giant in hand. I don't know what their last card is, though. I'm going to go ahead and just charm this, put it back on top. They can redraw that one. So they have giant in hand, and I don't know, actually they still have giant in hand. Draw to the Lock is fine. I can't cast it yet, but it's a fine card. I also like having access to Cling to Dust, especially against a red deck. I don't really want to get burned out with multiple burn spells, although it's very possible, having seen some of the cards they're playing, they're more on a ramp deck. So I'm just getting through my cards. Finally find my black source, and I'm like, great. Now I have a counter spell open, or a decent counter spell open, that can counter most anything given the size of their graveyard. I guess they could have 8 or 10 drops in their deck. Cast down Paradise Druid again. I'm not gonna fight over this with Exclude. Go ahead and get this. Find a Render Silent. Render Silent's fine. At this point, we basically stabilized the game. I don't feel like there's many reasonable ways that we lose this game. At this point, we've already gotten through the Gaia's Revenge. What's the mystical teachings? Yeah. No clue what I even get here. I don't know that it matters. Probably pull from and borrow. Yeah, pull from and borrow makes sense. Just draw 4. Draw 3, essentially. Draw 4, discard 1. Seems good. Okay, yeah, this is a Decree game. So I find Thematic Compass, get my attack in here for 1, and I'm looking just to Decree on their EOT. Discard whatever, so it doesn't probably matter at this point. Counter the world. Yeah, go ahead and counter this guy. Exclude him. And we're going to look to cash in a Decree EOT here, would be my guess. Probably good enough. Yeah, this is a 7 power spread across 7 bodies on the board. With the Augur plus the 6/1/1s. Great. Even a Cortazar joins. So yeah, they go ahead and pack this one in. Alright guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2 against Garrick's Gardner on Red-Green Ramp. Alright folks, back. Yeah, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep this because it has mana, right? Like, that's one of the things in this format, and this is also control decks. It's a little bit more loose of a deck, like you're looking to come back from behind. It's missing a black source to be able to cast one of the relevant spells it has in its hand, and then it has a Banishing Light that can just kind of deal with anything. In this matchup, like, I felt like there we go. Like, this is kind of the reason I want to keep this hand, is because like I felt like this hand was going to, well, I don't know how to put it. I was on the draw. Maybe it was a little greedy. Maybe it should have gone down to 6. But it just had its mana. That's a big thing in this format to me, is just having your mana. And we did draw into a Time Wipe, which is like sick. You're just like, all right, great. So if they kind of expand really aggressively, like, we're going to have a way to get kind of back into this game. At this point, I'm pretty comfortable not drawing any more lands, but my opponent also mulliganed pretty heavily, you know, and they haven't really been doing much. Like, they're kind of just hitting me with this 2/3, and I'm like, that's cool. Like, I don't really need to react to that yet. I go ahead and get back the Eternal Dragon because I'm so heavy. I'm so heavy on lands. I really rather incentivize them to play more stuff. Like, they play this, and I'm like, great. They missed an attack here, but I don't think it matters all that much. Go ahead and Time Wipe here. I have a follow-up Wrath, which is very nice. Why I find the Swamp here. They go ahead and cast Wood Elves, which is not legal in the format. I believe it's supposed to be Yavimaya Dryad is the card they're supposed to be playing, but it's fine. We said, I think we corrected it, and they're like, all right, yep, made a mistake, and it's no big deal. But yeah, the Elves, unfortunately not legal. And Soul of the Harvest, which is a card I'm going to deal with on my turn. I'm just going to Merciless Eviction this board, I think. I might wait and just Mortify it here. I can't recall. Oh, I'm Banishing Light. That's fine. I think at this point the world's kind of my oyster. I mean, the hand was a little greedy, but at this point, like, it's gas. Like, it's just going to kill everything. And eventually find a way to win. Palaka Worm, I let this resolve. I'm like, that's fine. Like, I'm going to blow my own wall up here, which kind of sucks, but I'm just going to Merciless Eviction again and then just leave up Mortify and, you know, Azorious Charm, Silumgar's Command. I am a little shy on black mana, though. I guess I can't leave up all those. Ripjaw Raptor, just another thing that, like, you know, has to basically be killed at some point. Dovin's Veto, probably not great in this matchup. They're playing Nikia, and, like, Nikia tends to mean, like, you're not playing a lot of non-creatures. Get in there with their 4/5. I have to Mortify this, mostly because I kind of wanted to just use Azorious Charm to draw cards here. I kind of wanted to get deeper in the deck. I mean, Azorious Charm is a card that I could hold on to. And there we go. We find some more cantrips. Find, like, another way to, like, manipulate my deck, which is kind of what I'm looking for here. Just look to get deeper in the deck and find that approach. Go ahead and cycle off the dragon here, cast the Omen, find Disdainful Stroke, which seems fine in this matchup. I actually don't opt to recurse the Eternal Dragon this turn, which could have been a mistake. Just get a counter spell here. I kind of want to just use the Omen, and I was kind of open to find some card draw. I didn't really want to tie up that much mana. Pretty soon, though, I'm going to be Eternal Dragoning every turn if it doesn't get killed. I go ahead and Silumgar's Command here, bouncing my Omen of the Sea and killing off their Paradise Druid mid-combat. They try to cast a Return to Nature to get back their what is this thing called? This big dumbass. Soul of the Harvest. Not allowing that, so we counter it back and get back our Omen and get some free cards off it after bouncing it. Find Oshitai's Command, have Revitalize up, which is great. And, yeah. Doing that blue-white thing. OP's evidently kind of it doesn't have much they can do. Go ahead and cast Revitalize here, find another counter spell. Do go ahead and get back the Eternal Dragon this turn. Find a Dolphin's Acuity, which I'm going to go ahead and do right now. Go ahead and cycle the Eternal Dragon. Just continue to get lands out of the deck. Just grind advantage. They have Rampant Growth here, which is A-okay. That doesn't really do all that much to change the status of the game for them. Go ahead and cycle this card off. Find another land. Go ahead and get back the Eternal Dragon. Find in Hostilities. And at this point, I think I cast Eternal Dragon. I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna start beating you down with this because like I don't have another cantrip to bounce the Dovin's Acuity, so I might as well force you to deal with my Eternal Dragon because it is a clock. It's a 5/5, so it'll win eventually. I believe they have Collision Colossus, which is fine. I'm just like, yeah, it's fine. It's dead. Like I'll get it back next turn. There's a Tinder Shoot Dryad. That's just going to get countered by Disdainful Stroke. Goes back to me, and I believe they go ahead and concede this turn. Believe they pack it in after I recurse this card. See a Thematic Compass. I may finish my turn up, but I believe they pack this one in. They're like, I don't think I got it. I'm like, yeah, probably not, but yeah, they go ahead and pack it in. I'm going to have Amazivith on board, get another Swamp here. To open up equity on Clean Dust whenever we draw it, leave up Vindicate, I suppose, and then, we'll probably not even cast an Eternal Dragon. I'll probably cycle because I believe I have one Plains left in the deck. Let me do a quick check. We have one Plains left in the deck. So, yeah. That was this game versus red green. This is the style of deck that we really want to face off against. The blue red deck probably not the style of deck we want to face off against. It's probably gonna be a harder matchup. This is the style of deck that we're really kind of hoping for. It's these big green X decks tend to be pretty favorable matchups for us. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily. All right, guys, we're back playing as Necropotence here, and this is a great hand. It's got perfect mana. It's got some trips. It's kind of got everything you need going on in it. I mean, maybe not everything you need, but what do you really need in an opening hand in this deck? You just need lands and spells. Ideally, a lot of lands and some spells to draw cards or counter spells. So they're playing my Rakdos Aristocrats build, which is a lot more aggressive based. I think it's going to be a fairly difficult matchup. They're going to want less Aristocrat style draws and more just red cards. The base of that deck's power is really in 3-drops. Has a lot of token-generating 3-drops, like Krenko, Hanwar, Garrison, Militia. Those style cards are Hanwar Garrison, I think is the name of the card. I forget. It's either Hanwar Militia or Hanwar Garrison. Anyways, we're not taking a significant beat down here. They've just got 2 1/1s on the board and a Witch's Oven, which is not really that threatening at this very point in time. Bastion of Remembrance is a card that I don't want to face off against, though. I go ahead and Sinister Sabotage that. Look to set up an Omen of the Sea on the EOT here. And then at some point end Hostilities, but right now I'm not really incentivized to. But the idea with this hand is stabilize the Dovin's Acuity after I sweep the board. Go ahead and get the Labyrinth down. I believe just cast the End Hostilities this turn. I'm just like, yeah, okay. I'll get it out of the way now. And then we got Cling to Dust up if we want to just cling something out of the bin. They, I believe, go ahead and cast Smothering A-Bomb here. Smothering A-Bomb is kind of awkward here because they don't have any creatures on the board. And Smothering A-Bomb, how this card works, flying, 4/3 devoid. That you, at the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice a creature. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. So they go ahead and sack it to itself with Witch's Oven just to see what they can find. Because it will draw a card via sacking itself as well. or having itself sack. Get a Cortazar down, still have clean dust up, and I have this Ojutai's Command up, which is probably going to allow me to stabilize against most any draw they may have. They have a Shriek Maw. I'm just going to go ahead and get this because I don't want them to have a 3-2 with evasion on board. Not that I really care about the Cortazar, but I just want to draw a card and cycle this thing off. Get deeper in the deck. Go ahead and cast the Dovin's Acuity out. I could opt to go for a Chemister's Insight main to get Dovin's Acuity back, but I will not have Drown and Lock up at that point, and I kind of want to be able to Drown and Lock anything that I find here. Because I put Ojutai's Command on top, I'm able to just Cling to Dust one of their non-creature spells, draw into the Ojutai's Command, counter the Sir Conrad, and draw an additional card. Just gives me one card deeper as opposed to Drowning and Locking it. I am going to go ahead and get a little bit of equity back, I think, on this Dovin's Acuity here. Just go ahead and cast Cling and say go. I kind of want to leave up the power sink at this point. Dread Melkin's not a big deal, though. Go ahead and EOT the Chemister's Insight. Finding Hyro, which is pretty good. And the name of the game now is just to grind. Just keep making land drops, keep drawing cards, keep gaining life off Dovin's Acuity. It all seems pretty good. I'm going to be discarding this turn, but that's not a big issue. I have a lot of lands in hand, and I'm very fine discarding 2 of them. Because it helps fuel my Cling to Dust, which is a pretty strong engine in this style of matchup, especially because graveyards, I think, will be partially relevant. I do go ahead and just get rid of the Blood Artist, and Necropotence goes ahead and just packs this one in as they're in some trouble. Quick pause, guys, and I'll be back in one moment. So, hey, guys, I don't know where we were at when we left off. Sorry, I had to take a little bit of a pause there. But let's jump into Game 2 against Necropotence, and we'll check that one out. Alright, folks, back for game number 2 against Necro here on the Rakdos deck. Grim Initiate, yep. That's pressure. I'm going to play the tap land out here. Could have been some equity to playing out the Evolving Wilds here. Let's go ahead and pitch Searing Spear, which I think is fine. I'm not going to have a lot of targets for it on board. They cast down Annex. Annex is fine, too. Again, this is I Forsake the Worldly in hand, which is pretty good against Annex. It's also an exile effect, so you don't get the you don't get the 1/1s off of it, which is kind of nice. So feeling pretty decent here. Go ahead and get this EOT. The Field of Ruin will help fix my mana for black if need be. They try to play on a Siege Gang. Siege Gang's fine. I'm just going to go ahead and complicate this. There's an option to try to Disdainful Stroke it because it's a card that I can Disdainful Stroke. And I also know this deck because I built the Rakdos deck that they're playing right now. And know that, well, it does have some 5-drops. It doesn't have a ton. It's not a ridiculous volume of 5s. There's a Fire Blade Artist, which I'll probably go ahead and Azorious Charm here, I believe. Yeah. And take the 1. Kind of getting pretty low at this point. I go ahead and shuffle their deck up, so they're not going to redraw that card. Get back the Charm. I'm going to leave up my mana here. Probably repeal something on their turn, but I am getting pretty low on life. I do need to kind of be careful here. I need to stabilize relatively soon. I really haven't found that one Wrath effect to stabilize, and my opponent's kind of continually drawing pressure, right? So we're not in we're not in a great spot, I guess is my point. We're not in a real great spot. I mean, we're just kind of bouncing stuff and trying to draw deeper into the deck and bouncing stuff at card advantage, but not really getting anything that is going to help fix this. Take the Logic's not here because I can't find a Wrath effect. I am going to counter this because it represents 3 damage over time. We're at least going to take a hit for 1 off of it, given what our hand currently is. We don't have access to black mana to Drown in the Locket once it hits the board, so I'm going to counter it here because I know the other 2 cards in their hand they can cast this turn are both 1/1s. And again, a board sweeper would be much welcome, but we're just not really locking a board sweeper up. So I'm going to have to basically 1-for-1 on some of these cards, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. They try to cast Tibalt out here. I just go ahead and counter it with Prohibit, which also means their 3-drop they have in hand, the 3/3, is not going to resolve this turn. Go ahead and cast this. Get rid of something that's not relevant. Drawn to an Eternal Dragon, which honestly at this point can't block. So they've drawn another creature, 2-drop creature, so they can cast all these cards this turn, which is problematic from the standpoint that I can't just cast the Eternal Dragon next turn and actually block. So I'm going to cycle Eternal Dragon to find a Plains, find an Oshitai's Command, which buys me 1 turn at a minimum. Find a Warrant, which buys me a little more time. Put the this thing on top, that 3/3. And yeah, right now, again, we're still kind of in a rough spot. Revitalize gets me 1 deeper. Find a Swamp, which gives me access to Forbidden Alchemy. And maybe if we can find a Wrath, we can get there. We're really just kind of clinging on to every hope here. But not really getting the things that we're hoping to get. It's possible that Fact or Fiction was a better choice there. I have to relook at it. Approach. So I go ahead and cast Approach. I mean, in retrospect, I think Fact would have actually won me the game because we found the literal Approach. But I think Fact was correct from the standpoint that Fact gave us a look at the top 5 to find a Wrath effect to have stabilized. And most of our Wrath effects we get a cast there. So we draw 2 and go ahead and concede. So we can kill their Mayhem Devil here and then bounce something, but we're taking 2 at a minimum, so we're pretty dead. Yeah, I don't think there's any way we're getting out of this. I suppose no, we couldn't have bounced our own Mystic Sanctuary to get a card back. We're just pretty dead. We kind of needed something that was not Bad River and Plains here. If we'd hit multiple card draw, maybe we could change into something. Or a way to gain some more incremental life. Maybe we buy another draw step to get closer to that approach. But just a little bit short. Again, OP, kind of hit in a sequence they needed to have, after we had some of our more stabilizing style turns. We're with them, but bouncing their stuff. They continue to have that threat plus another threat they could play in that same mana sequence. So, our tempo style plays Repeal and Into the Royal, well, they were effective at staving off initial damage. They weren't really as effective at neutralizing their mana on follow-on turns, which is kind of one of the things you're hoping to do with them, is use them for bad tempo, right? We didn't really get a ton of value off that because they kind of sequenced well as in terms of redrawing the Mayhem Devil plus having a 2-drop or drawing a 2-drop. In that same sequence. So, yeah, just take the beat down, and, it is what it is. Sometimes you just don't hit the Wrath effect you need, and you miss out on it, and that's just that. That said, you've seen the games of this. We're at 62 cards in deck, so we've gone pretty deep in the deck. We're on 3 of them, so I think, statistically speaking, sometimes you just don't hit it, right? And, you have by this point? Yeah, we're a third through the deck, but sometimes you're just not going to. Anyways, quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 3 against Necropotence piloting my build of Rakdos Kratz. Alright, folks, we're back. Hand looks fine. Gotta Revitalize. It's gonna need mana, but we are a 39 land deck. It's the most common draw in our deck. We've got some cantrips here. I think we're gonna be just fine with this. And it's also got the stabilizing play, the Merciless Eviction in hand, which is especially relevant versus Kratz, which is going to be using more death-based triggers, because Merciless Eviction does not kill things, it exiles them. Shredder Butcher's a really good one to have on curve here. Very powerful card. Get a PNLR. So OP's got a really good start with the deck. The deck's doing what it's supposed to do, which is apply pressure. I call this Kratz, but it's a Kratz deck that applies pressure, right? You're not really all in on the Kratz combo stuff. You just incidentally have some of it. But you see some of the cards that the Oven in the first game, the Grim Initiate. These cards are not commonly played aggressive cards, but they're not so far off that you couldn't, I guess is my point. But yeah, get after Snacia Blood Artist here, which again is going to decentivize a Wrath effect. We're taking a pretty sizable beating, but we're at 22. So, we've got some time, and I'm more than willing to take a hit here, just so I can get a little more value off of this Merciless Eviction. Fortunately or unfortunately, either my opponent doesn't have a play to make, or, they don't want to play more threats into the board. But they put all their mana into pumping up their artifact, which is a good play. It's solid here because the most likely line of play that I do have is just a Wrath of God the board. Unfortunately for them, it's Merciless Affliction, which just board wipes them. Unfortunately, they have a pretty solid draw, and they had another threat in hand, and they had a pretty solid draw step this turn, another threat. So I basically have to board wipe again. I 1-for-1 twice, essentially. Just get rid of all their threats. Unfortunately, they have another good draw step. They draw another good threat. This is basically a 7-point life swing is how I look at this card. I just go ahead and set Adrift on this card to buy another draw step for myself. Not exactly what I wanted to find. I kind of wanted to find a way to trade forward an advantage, but this is still going to stymie them a bit and give me time to cast this Chemister's Insight to find hopefully some more answers. Cling to Dust is time, but I don't have a ton of time right now. Syncopate, a little bit late to the party, but that's one of the things that can happen with these style of cards. Sometimes they can just come late to the party, right? They have a Captain's Clause. I am going to go ahead and Dovin's Veto this. That's fine. Would have certainly rather seen that as opposed to like an Orcish Hellraiser the turn prior, but it is what it is. And we draw this, and we're pretty happy with this. The downside of this card is if they draw any sort of burn spell, which I built this deck that they're playing, so I know it has a lot of burn in it, because I value those effects quite a bit in this format and in that style of deck specifically. So if they have any burn, we're just going to die here. But if they drew a land, or if they drew if they drew a threat, I'm fine with that. If they drew burn, I'm just dead. Land or threat, I'm probably fine with. Burn, I am not. I do need to get an untap here, and if I get the untap, I'm in a very good spot. I'm just going to start attacking with everything, because now I can pretty much counter anything they can do, and or kill anything they can do. They cast a Pia Nalar out here. I am going to go ahead and exclude this. I could obviously dispark it, but I don't want to allow them to have 2 flying threats on board. That would oblige me to time wipe or do some crazy stuff. At this point, we're just clinging to dust to gain some life. Gaining 3 is pretty relevant here because it puts me out of range. It puts me to 4, which puts me out of range of like the Searing Spears, Incinerates, Chain Lightning, stuff like that. And just slowly clocking, chipping them with these 1/1s. There's a Yahenni. That's a must kill due to the fact that it will do 4 damage to me and kill me in 1 hit. Revitalize is pretty nice. Just going to keep on, it's providing more fuel for Cling. Really, at this point, I'm just looking for counter spells so I can maintain my board advantage. Cast Dragon Fodder. I'm just going to not hard counter, but I'm going to counter this with the Syncopate just to maintain my position. And whilst leaving up D-Spark, which is, I guess, unnecessary because they're basically playing everything off the top of their deck at this point. Latnam's Legacy is fine. Probably get rid of the time wipe at this point in the game. Put them down to 4, and then have them dead on the following turn. Hope to draw a counter spell here. Draw very well. Get the Factor Fiction and the Dissolve. They drew a land, and that is game against Necropotence on the Black-Red Kratz deck. Quick pause, guys. Be back. We've got one more game for you against Jund Midrange. Hey guys, how are you? And playing Baylight here. Baylight's they play quite a bit of Canadian Highlander. They tend to play Abzan in that format. And it appears they're not off green, but they're definitely not an Abzan based on their first land. They play Kazandu, a Refuge. So possibly RG, possibly Jund. Paradise Druid, not a bad one. I'm going to look to leave up the Disdainful Stroke if they play a 4-mana Walker. That'd be pretty nice. Prohibit, you get to kind of see that it's not the best on the draw in this game. I could go for an Eternal Dragon activation here on their EOT, and I may opt not to, though. They may just do nothing with their mana, and I'm like, weird. All right, they cast Painful Truths here, play out their land. I do go for the Eternal Dragon. To get the Plains, not bad. Merciless Eviction looks pretty good because it's going to allow me to stabilize in this game. I just go ahead and get a Watcher down. I'm actually looking for more lands here. I put Plains underneath my Watcher because I'm going to need a lot of white mana to cast these 2 Wraths I have in my hand. And right now I don't have direct access to it. So Domri Rod can be kind of annoying. Right now it kind of just misses a bunch, which is a thing it can do depending on how your deck's built. Go ahead and draw here looking for my land drops. Luckily, I find all 3 lands, so it's like, great. I can pitch this one that comes into play tapped and just play this first one out, which is good. Play out a Bloodline Keeper. I go ahead and Disdainful Stroke this. I believe they have a Reanimate effect. Yep, and they go for this, not my Eternal Dragon, which is kind of nice. Yep. Go ahead and cast out the Dovin's Acuity here to get a little deeper in the deck. Say go. They're probably going to fight with Domri Rod on the next turn, be my guess. Oh, I go ahead and Azorious Charm here. That's right. Azorious Charm here to draw a card. Because I really don't care about their attack step next turn. I'm going to let them attack because I don't think I'm dead. And I'll probably just Merciless Eviction it. So I kind of want to use the mana effectively now. So I can get Dovin's Acuity back in hand. And I'm not trying to do that in an alternate way in a later turn. So they basically cast most of their hand out, it appears. This is going to be a great Wrath turn. Just going to go ahead and Wrath the board. Get pretty good card advantage off that. And what do they have as a follow-up? I forget what they had as a follow-up this game. But basically, that was the big turn. So they have Goblin Dark Dwellers. They're going to take the Winding Way to try to get more cards in their hand, try to build back up their hand. They unfortunately only hit one creature card, which is Satyr Wayfinder, off of the Winding Way. But it's Winding Way. It's a little higher variance, depending on how your deck's built. And also, I mean, I'm sure their deck's built fine, but sometimes it just gets one thing, right? Sometimes it gets no things. Sometimes it gets all four things, which is painful. So we're going to hit for 5 here, which is a decent bit. They cast Threat on the Thrash Threat card, or the Threat half of Thrash Threat. Go ahead and do some card draw here. I'm not to 7, but I have another Wrath, so I'm pretty comfortable allowing all these cards to resolve and taking the one hit off of it. They go ahead and, I believe, Death Sprout one of their own cards to find additional land drop here. Go ahead and board wipe them. I go ahead and Shimmer here. I could set Adrift the Domri, but I'd rather set Adrift the Domri and then counter it on the backswing, and right now I cannot do that. I have a Wall Blossom, which is fine. And then Mouth. I believe it's Mouth and Feed or something like that. And they draw one off of, I believe, the Feed half of that card. Yeah, it's Mouth Feed, yeah. I go ahead and oust the Hippo. Set Adrift the Domri, and then draw into my top few cards. Get up Dovin's Cutie back, pitch a tap land, and say go. Pretty happy to hit Oblivion Ring here. I'm going to allow the Domri to resolve because it's not that high of an impact card on this board. If it gets them a free card, it gets them a free card. But I can Oblivion Ring it on the following turn. I go ahead and Sinister Sab this, put the land in the bin. I do kind of want to make a land drop next turn, but I'm pretty happy just taking a draw step off the top as well because I have this Dovin's Acuity, which I'm going to put down first. And again, like I said, hope to hit land, but if I don't, it's not the end of the world. Get the Oblivion Ring down, kill off their Domri, and say go. And I've still got, a hard counter up here and/or a Power Sink. Power Sink, we're actually a little behind in the mana fight here. They have Cultivates and stuff like that, so they've been making a lot of land drops. Woodland Wanderer is fine. I have a Time Wipe. I'm kind of hoping that they, see that it resolves and play something else out, but they do not. Go ahead and cycle off this Forsake. Mana Leak looking pretty embarrassing on this board, but is what it is. Go ahead and just Time Wipe them here. And now the world's kind of our oyster. I mean, there's very few things they can draw here that are that threatening. I suppose the most threatening thing they can draw is, literally a Gaia's Revenge, but I know Baylight pretty well. They're probably not playing Gaia's Revenge. That card is, unless you're ramping really hard, it's very all-in. And it's not the best against a lot of matchups. If it had Trample, maybe more justifiable, but not having Trample is a big one. I believe go ahead and do the old top here. The land I kind of want because I don't really ever want to be in a position where I'm behind on mana versus another deck. I look at this Jund build as more of a controlling mid-range list. So I think they're going to, and you can see that in some of their card choices. I believe we saw Mind Shatter in the bin. So they're going to have a lot of card advantage cards, and we need to be able to meet them mana for mana or better. Daredevil's one of those cards. It's a 2-drop, but I need to counter it because the cards in my bin are just too good. If they get a pull from tomorrow and cast that for a million, I'm probably not going to be able to win the game. I'll go ahead and get Anticipate off. 5 Mystical Teachings, which is a great one. That's going to be one that allows me to pull ahead. We really start the slow climb that is Dovin's Acuity here. Dovin's Acuity is just it's a great engine card in this deck specifically. Is it a great card, period? No, probably not. But in this format, for this style of deck, I think it's a great engine. I could opt to counter that card. I don't. I kind of figure with Mystical Teachings, I'm going to be okay. If I really need to find something to kill it, I can do that. But I'll probably find something regardless of all my card draw. And there we go. There's a Thematic Compass. That's going to flip into a Spire for Orazca, which is a Maze of Ith, essentially. Which will hold the Mana Gorger Hydra in check, so I can pretty much freely cast spells into it. It can get as big as it wants to get, and there are some cards that could punish it if I only have Thematic Compass to deal with it. But that all said, I still have the Mystical Teachings as well to deal with it. So, I'm probably not going to get killed by this one card. They're probably going to have to play more into my board, which is always worrisome for like a mid-range style deck because obviously they don't want to get Wrath of God at an advantage. They go and attack. I just turn it around with the Spires. They go to EOT here, so I'm going to go for a repeal on this card just to get deeper in my deck. I could repeal my own like Birth of Meletis to try to get another card draw, but like honestly at this point, like I don't have an issue drawing more cards. I honestly have an issue with like hand zone size. Like that's going to be an issue with Dovin's Acuity. So I'd rather just let Birth of Meletis go away. I don't think I need the additional planes off of it. I am going to go ahead and discard this turn. I go ahead and Mystical Teachings for Drown in the Loch, because it's basically a hard counter at this point, based on their graveyard consisting of 25 cards, which is a lot. Might as well be a million. Go ahead and Ajutai's Command this card. They go ahead and attempt to play a Tectonic Giant out, which I'm going to go ahead and Drown in the Loch. And yeah, we're not looking like we're in a bad spot. I believe they concede relatively soon. I go ahead and gain 2 life here. I play out the Mystic Sanctuary, put Drown in the Loch back on top of my deck. Because again, it's a 2-mana hard counter for all intents and purposes here. Go ahead and Dovin's Acuity to draw into the Drown in the Loch. Go ahead and cast, I believe, Factor Fiction here. No, I'm casting the draw too. So Chemist's Insight here. Get rid of the Mana Leaks. It's pretty bad at this point, and get the Acuity back in hand. We'll go ahead and pitch a land and probably this mana sink or this power sink. Oh, I only have to discard the land. Great. OP kind of just basically waiting for us to kill them over there. And like this can be kind of a more miserable portion of the game when like you just need to find a way to lock it up and you don't have a way to really lock it up. Right now I'm just basically digging for my approach to the Second Sons. The game, for, like I said, all intents and purposes, one, you see a Mystical Teachings get cast on their last EOT to find Thassa's Intervention, which will be a card that will likely find the approach because we're at 35 cards left in deck. This is probably one of the more draw-heavy decks I've played in 100 card in a long while, but it oftentimes will be down to like 30 to 23, 30 cards or whatever in deck by the time it wins. This is obviously a turn 19 game, and we're at 35 left in deck. But yeah, I exclude here, and then I've got a couple additional like cantrippy style cards like the Revitalize, and then the following EOT of their next EOT, not this EOT coming up, but the EOT after this EOT, we're going to look to probably Thassa's Intervention, basically for most of our deck, over half of our deck, and likely find the approach and then go for that game win. So guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2 against Baylight here on Jund. Alright, folks, we are back for game number 2 against Baylight here. So this hand's, like, questionable, right? Like, they're a slower deck, so I do opt to keep this as mana. It also has a turn 2 counter. It has a turn 3 counter. You don't really want to have approach in your openers, because it doesn't really do anything until much later in the game. And they're really not a deck. They're a deck that will win via killing me with life, but, like, I don't think my life total matters that much against them. Like, I don't think 7 life is going to be the difference between, like, a game win or a game loss at the point at which I can cast a 7-mana spell, I guess is my point. I think by that point, they're going to be hitting me for a whole bunch. I do go ahead and syncopate this card. Civic Wayfinder, may seem like an odd card to counterspell, but finding free lands is really very powerful. Again, with Winding Way. One of the things I like that Baylight does here is they don't play their land before casting the Winding Way. because miscalc is not legal in the format. And it also, could prompt me to counter this because they could be looking for mana. That could have been, I could have, screwed them on mana. Not that I was trying to screw them on mana, but I'm not going to let Winding Way resolve regardless, because if they name creatures and they get 3 cards or 2 or 3 cards off of it, they've just acquired a 2-for-1, which I don't really want to allow them to do. I'd rather have cards like Olivia Voldaren resolve, because Olivia Voldaren is on board, and my deck's set up in a way in which it can draw cards like Time Wipe, where I can just deal it a card advantage on board, right? As opposed to future resources. So Chandra Resolve. Chandra's not great for me, but she doesn't kill very fast either. I go ahead and just play my lands. I can't really do much. I've kind of drawn all my win cons. I've drawn Eternal Dragon, Decree, and Approach. So one of the plays that I actually kind of disagree with Baylight on here, they actually take my Decree of Justice here. I mean, they have a Duress. And I'm like, well, that kind of sucks because I have Approach in hand, and I figure I'm going to lose Approach. But they actually hit the Decree. I think they could have allowed me to keep Decree. Maybe their worry was maybe they had a lot of lands in hand, and they just didn't want their Chandra to get beat up by Decree. They wanted their draw engine to stay around. But I actually think Approach is probably better, due to the fact that I am going to be able to cast on the following turn and then get it out of my hand zone so that it can't be disrupted via most of the means their deck has available to disrupt it. So yeah, I don't know. They go ahead and animate dead here. They get back the Eternal Dragon. I'm like, okay, you got a 4/5. I'm kind of drawing goose eggs though. I've drawn one really good card this game, which is Time Wipe, and then basically all my win cons, which is not all my other win cons. I already had the Approach, which is not really what you want to be drawing. But it kind of leads to an interesting game where I'm basically the aggressive deck. I treat myself as the aggressive deck in this matchup, in this game specifically, where I'm like, all right, well, my beatdown, I gotta go for my beatdown plan, which is to turbo approach you. They go for a Cling. I forget what they get. They probably get the counter spell. Cool. They're pretty much free to draw, take 8 damage off the library every time, because I'm not killing them with their life total. And they know it, so they're just drawing every card. So it doesn't really tell me anything, I guess is what I mean by that, is them taking 8 off Sylvan Library doesn't really tell me anything. If they can take 8 off Sylvan Library, they probably will. Exclude their Denny P. Have a really good draw here. I find Telling Time. I put a Mystic Sanctuary on top and put a Azorious Charm in hand. Go ahead, Mystic Sanctuary, the Telling Time back to the top of my deck, which means I will be able to Azorious Charm into it on, my turn or their turn, whatever. Which is kind of nice because that's going to give me access to my Approach on the following turn. Now, one of the downsides of this line of play is if they have Field of Ruin or access to Field of Ruin in hand, then they can Field of Ruin my Mystic Sanctuary and force me to shuffle, which would suck. They have Mind Shatter, which they find off the Chandra. I go ahead and just cast the Azorious Charm right now, cast Telling Time, find a Dovin's Veto, put the Approach on top. I go ahead and counter the Mind Shatter. It doesn't matter if I counter this or not, but I just do it for fun. Get it for 4. They play on a mountain. I believe cast a Lavalanche, which is a sick card. This is one of the better cards in Jund, in my opinion. This card is very powerful. Lavalanche, sorcery, Jund plus X, deals X damage to target player or planeswalker, and each creature that player or planeswalker's controller controls, which is a very powerful effect. I love that card. But anyways, we go with the beatdown approach plan, and the beatdown approach plan ends up working out here. I think we got a little lucky. Telling Time was strong. This is a very strong card in this archetype specifically, and probably in this format in blue. Telling Time is one of the better 2-mana cantrips that you can play. I mean, I guess there's Opt at 1 mana, and then there's Twisted Image and shit. But realistically, when you're looking at good, when I say good, decent deck manipulation, you're looking at 2 mana, like legit deck manipulation. This is one of the better ones. Is it a great card? No, not really, but it's pretty strong in this deck, and ripping into it and getting to use it to set up doing it again after having cast an Approach was pretty cool. So this game kind of ended in a spectacular Approach finish. Anyways, guys, that's the last game that I'm going to be covering with the deck. I hope you enjoyed watching Blue-White, Splash Black, Azorious Approach. Or I guess you could say, I'll call it Esper Approach. Do its thing. It's a very fun deck, and is it going to win a lot of games versus Red Deck wins? No, generally not. But against most other things, it has a pretty good game. You can actually play a pretty good game with it, and it's a deck that I think really has a lot of play to it. Like, has a lot of considerations, a lot of play decisions to it. Until you get to a certain point where it's just like, God, can I please just draw this approach? That'll come up too. But yeah, if that's your style of play, I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, you guys take care, and hopefully we'll see you back soon. Take care now.